Is it? Why do you guys put signs in the traffic?
Why do we don't?
Why do you?
Hey,
Huh?
they are now live
I'm just curious why. We, you do,
Everything
they,
you
we don't.
say is
Like,
on YouTube.
Forever.
yeah.
Yeah. How are you, Keith?
I'm doing well. How are you?
All right. I like being back on the good side. I know. I owe you this. It's quiet. Mm-hmm. Quiet class down. Almost.
Diane, is Matt here tonight? Oh, he's hiding. Hi, Matt. Good?
Way back there.
A little farther back. He's a little further back.
Okay, I think we can start. Good evening. Let's start with the pledge of allegiance. Good evening and welcome to the March meeting of the Town of Lancaster Zoning Board of Appeals meeting. We need to start by the board going into executive session for consult with counsel. So please excuse us. We will be back shortly.
We have to do a roll call.
You want to do the, yeah. we
I'll
should
second
do
the
that.
motion.
Sorry. Thanks, Keith.
You got it.
Okay. Will you take the roll, please?
Mr. Hain.
Here.
Mr. Matthews.
Here.
Mr. Michaely.
Here.
Mr. Storr.
Here.
Mr. Tillmans.
Here.
Mr. Zeller.
Here.
Chairman Donacelli.
Here.
And did you have a motion and a second?
Yes, I'm sorry. I move that we go into executive session to consult with counsel.
And I will second.
Thank you.
Mr. Hain.
Yes.
Mr. Matthews.
Yes.
Mr. Michaely.
Yes.
Mr. Storr.
Yes.
Mr. Tillmans.
Yes.
Mr. Zeller.
Yes.
Chairman Monacelli.
Yes.
Okay. The YouTube will stay on, so it will still be recording. Jill? Jill? Oh, you got it.
They might have to, because I know the one is older, so we got another one. And then we got to Durban for your install first.
Which one is the first arcade? The one before
That was, I took that, they go beds, showed up and, just like a picture of her. Oh, but that was the whole other. Yeah.
No official actions were taken by the zoning board of appeals in executive session.
Thank you. I make a motion that we close the executive session.
Second.
Roll call vote,
The
please.
second was, thank you. Mr. Hain.
Yes.
Mr. Matthews.
Yes.
Mr. Michaeli.
Yes.
Mr. Storr.
Yes.
Mr. Tillman.
Yes.
Mr. Zeller.
Yes.
Ms. Monacelli.
Yes, thank you. Dan, would you read the first case, please?
Yes. First case considered by the zoning board of appeals is that a petition of Tara Bennett, development manager for the Broadway Group, LLC, 216 West Side Square, Huntsville, Alabama, calling upon the zoning board of appeals for an interpretation concerning the notice of noncompliance of the premises owned by Frank Simonelli, Revocable Trust, located at 3972 Walden Avenue, Lancaster, New York. Pursuant to Chapter 400 zoning Section 4 of the Code of the Town of Lancaster and Section 267A4 of the New York State Town Law, the board shall hear and decide appeals where it is alleged that there is an error or misinterpretation in any order, requirement, decision, or determination by any administrative official of the town charged with the enforcement of the town law. The board may reverse, modify, or affirm, in whole or in part, any such appealed order, requirement, decision, or determination appealed from, and may make such order, requirement, decision, or determination as in its opinion ought to be made in strictly applying and interpreting the provisions of this ordinance, and for such purposes shall have all the powers of the officer from whom the appeal is taken. The petitioner hereby appeals to the Zoning Board of Appeals of the Town of Lancaster for an interpretation of the Notice of Noncompliance, Variance A, of Tara Bennett, Development Manager for the Broadway Group, LLC, pursuant to the authority granted in Chapter 400, Zoning Section 4 of the Code of the Town of Lancaster, and Section 267A4 of New York State Town Law. A variance from the requirement of Chapter 400, Zoning Section 15, Subsection C, Schedule B of the Code of the Town of Lancaster. The request calls for building setback from a right-of-way of 20 feet from Quail Run. Chapter 400, Zoning Section 15, Subsection C, Schedule B of the Code of the Town of Lancaster requires a minimum front yard setback of 35 feet. The petitioner therefore requests a 15-foot variance.
Thank you. Do we have a representative? Good evening.
Good evening. Mark Romanowski here on behalf of the Broadway Group. What's before you tonight is a pretty narrow question. The clerk did a great job of kind of laying it all out. What we're here is really on the question of interpretation of what setback applies to this particular project in the MFMU zone. So the way your code is written, you have a separate schedule that lays out your various setback requirements for different elements. Relative to the MFMU zone, the schedule does not have a minimum front setback as applied to commercial development. While commercial development is permitted in the MFMU district, the actual code provision and the schedule that adopts the setbacks doesn't detail anything for commercial uses. It states instead that detached dwelling units on an individual lot require the R district setback, which in this case is 35 feet. So our position is that a finding that 35-foot setback applies to a commercial development is inappropriate. And therefore, we're appealing to this board for an interpretation of your code and to appeal the decision of the code enforcement officer. We did separately, and I think for purposes of, ease and consistency, we did separately and on a parallel path suggest that if the board agrees with the code enforcement officer's interpretation, that we would request a variance from that. The store is going to be 20 feet from Quail Run, and we would be requesting a variance for a 15-foot difference of what's required. However, since there are other variances which are not on the agenda this evening, I think what makes most sense is if the board goes down that direction, we table that issue and then hear all of the variances at the time when we go forward on the rest of the variances. There's 2 other variances that we're requesting. That seems to me a little bit more efficient. So just keep the question isolated to this interpretation issue, and then from there, we can, the board can table the other matter and just hear them all at once the next time. So that's it. I mean, this is a highly legal question. It's not a factual question. It's purely a legal question, one of interpretation of your code. So I'm here to answer any questions that you might have, but to me, it's pretty
Could you
straightforward.
spell your last name?
Sure, it's ROMANOWSKI.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Great.
We'll open up for questions from the board. Mr. Hain?
Is it reasonable to believe that you would build with a 0 setback?
It's fairly common in commercial development to have 0 setbacks.
Is it reasonable to believe you'd build this development, this particular project with a 0 setback?
Probably not, but I don't see how it's relevant to a code interpretation. Your code says what your code says. It's not up for what I feel like it should be. It's what does your code say?
Thank you. No more questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hain. Mr. Michaeli?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm just going by the guidance that the state gives us for these things, because this is a pretty uncommon request for us. And the state guidance says, where there are no prior decisions to rely on, the Board of Appeals should attempt to determine the governing board's original intent in enacting the provision in question. In arriving at this determination, the board shall consider prior documentation such as minutes of governing board meetings, testimony of local officials, and planning advisory documents which may have accompanied the enactment. I don't know if any of us were involved when this code was written. Matt Fischone, if I could call on Matt, to just give us some guidance here. Matt, if you can give us some background when so the MFMU this code first came about in 2000?
This particular schedule was adopted in December of 2020,
Okay.
and that was after adopting our updated zoning code to reflect a reduction in the number of zoning districts within the town.
Okay. So what was, at that point, there was, right now, as was told to us, the code reads one thing, and you interpret it as being 35 feet?
That's correct.
So what was the intent, when this code was written, MFMU, was the intent for it to be 0?
No, no. In determining what a setback dimension was, I had to rely fully on what I had in front of me at the time, which reasonably, a 35-foot dimension applied as it is written in the schedule for one of the listed primary structures.
Okay.
I applied that dimension to this as being a permitted and primary structure.
And so prior to that, this MFMU this MFMU zoning was brand new in 2020. Prior to that, was this, what would this property have been zoned?
This was zoned residential, commercial, office.
Okay. So this may be a tough question, but for residential, commercial office, what would the setbacks have been prior?
I recall 65 feet
Okay.
from a property line.
Okay. Would the intent have been to make it 65 with the newly formed MF?
At the time of the code adoption, the intent was to reduce it to 45 feet.
Okay. Okay. That's all I need to know. Thank you.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I have no other questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mickley. Mr. Matthews?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question was just asked, so I'm all
Oh,
set. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Mr. Storr?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sir, question for you. Sure. This is to be a store, correct?
That's correct.
So in the mixed family, multi-use areas, the intent of the rule and what is actually written is for there to be storefronts on, think of an apartment complex with stores listed in front of it, or with stores on the first floor. So wouldn't you, I'm asking for your interpretation. Wouldn't you say that this would fall, instead of nothing, do what you want, wouldn't this fall more along the lines of this is a store along that definition of it?
Yeah, I think what you're talking about, the code was intended to allow mixed uses.
Yeah,
But it's not exclusive to mixed uses.
Correct. And when it talks about a multi-use dwelling building, they're talking about those not new apartments, but the apartments that have 2 or 3 floors with apartments on the second, third, and the first floor being a gym, a store, and it actually lists store as one of the uses for it.
Sure.
Wouldn't it make sense to interpret the code as that rather than there is nothing for just a standalone store?
Well, I think the legislature has a responsibility for making that decision. So you're starting to bleed into legislative actions if you're trying to set what you think the legislature meant to do. Certainly, it's probably an error. I mean, I'm not going to tell you that no reference to a setback was appropriate, but the way the code's written, it was written in error. So, we're in an ambiguous area, which is why we brought this in the first place. As I've mentioned, we've also asked the alternative to say, fine, if you say it's 35 feet, we're going to ask for a variance from that. So, whichever way this board goes, we'll follow whatever that path is.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. No more questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Storr. Mr. Tillmans?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have no questions at this time.
Thank you. Mr. Zelak?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have no questions as well.
Okay, thank you. Matt, can we ask you to come back up?
Sure.
Thank you. What is going on now with rectifying this situation? Or is the standard going to be 45 feet as originally intended?
The intent at this point during the time of moratorium, specifically to the multifamily mixed-use district, is to reestablish a proper setback dimension and show it properly on our schedule.
I'm sorry, the last part again?
To show it properly on our schedule.
Okay, all right. And will that be 45 feet?
It's
or-
proposed to be a 45-foot dimension at this point.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
All right, anyone on the board have any other questions? Okay, there being none, we, at this point, open it up to the audience. However, I need to stress that we are not entertaining the request for variances this evening. The only thing that we're talking about is the request for an interpretation, pardon me, of the code as it's written. Okay. So does anyone from the audience have anything they'd like to say? Okay. There being none, do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Thank you.
Whereas zoning board of appeals have made the following findings. Whereas on January 23rd, 2025, Tara Bennett of the Broadway Group submitted an appeal to the code enforcement officer's determination to issue a notice of noncompliance. TBBG's request for a building setback from the right-of-way of 20 feet from Quail Run, and whereas pursuant to Town Law 267B-1, TBBG seeks an interpretation for the Town of Lancaster Zoning Board of Appeals that the proposed retail store is not a dwelling unit and there is no guidance for a front yard setback for a commercial building in the multifamily mixed-unit district in the Code Schedule B, and whereas pursuant to Town Law 267-17, the ZBA held a hearing on TBBG's interpretation appeal at the representative of TBBG and the public were heard, and whereas pursuant to 6 NYCRR 617.531, an interpretation appeal is a type 2 action not requiring further review under the New York State Environmental Quality Review Act seeker, and now therefore be it resolved by the Town of Lancaster Zoning Board of Appeals that TPBG's appeal is hereby denied for the following reason. No setback would be an unreasonable expectation. It was never the intent of the governing board to create no setback. And similar sized non-dwellings all comply or go further than this proposed setback.
No setback would be,
No, assuming no
setback.
setback would be unreasonable
okay. It was never the intent of the governing board.
to create no setback. And similar sized non-dwellings in the area all comply.
Similar,
Sized non-dwellings in the area all comply or exceed with this proposed setback.
okay.
TPPG is directed to supplement its application with a variance application form, the required fee and additional findings addressing the factors set forth by Town Law 267-B3 for area variances. The town clerk shall notice the hearing on TPPG's application for the appropriate meeting pursuant to town law. This resolution would be effective immediately.
Thank you. Second?
I'll second.
Second, Mr. Matthews. Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Hain.
Yes.
Mr. Matthews.
Yes.
Mr. Michaely.
Yes.
Excuse me, Mr. Storr.
Yes.
Mr. Tillman.
Yes.
Mr. Zeller.
Yes.
Chairman Monticelli.
Yes. Thank you. Your request is denied.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Diane, would you read the next case, please?
The second case considered by the Zoning Board of Appeals is that of the petition of Joseph Prinzbach, 540 Ransom Road, Lancaster, New York, for two variances for the purpose of constructing a residential accessory structure on premises owned by the petitioner at 540 Ransom Road, to wit: A, a variance from the requirement of Chapter 400 zoning, Section 13, subsection C, Schedule B of the Code of the Town of Lancaster. The request calls for constructing an 18-foot tall residential accessory. Chapter 400 zoning, Section 13, subsection C, Schedule B of the Code of the Town of Lancaster requires a maximum building height of 16 feet. The petitioner therefore requests a variance of 2 feet. B, a variance from the requirements of Chapter 400 zoning, Section 13, subsection C, Schedule B of the Code of the Town of Lancaster. The request calls for constructing a 1,536 square foot residential accessory structure. Chapter 400, zoning section 13, subsection C, Schedule B of the Code of the Town of Lancaster requires a maximum structure size of 1,250 square feet. The petitioner therefore requests a variance of 286 square feet.
Thank you. We have someone from 540 Ransom? Would you give us your name and your address for the record, please?
Joseph Prinsbach, 540 Ransom Road.
Thank you. Okay, tell us about your request.
I want to put up a residential accessory structure. I want to primarily use it for storing cars, and I want to put in a lift, so therefore I need a 12-foot ceiling, and then the building is then taller than the 16 feet with the size of the building.
All right, questions from the board? Mr. Michaeli?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would just note that we do have a letter from a resident, the owner of the property across the street, named Sarah Saba, S-A-B-A. And it's asking that we deny I won't read the entire letter, but asking that we deny it due to the size and potential for commercial use. I would just say that you realize that if this wasn't agreed to, there'd be no commercial use allowed inside it.
Right.
You do realize that, right? We've had larger ones in the past. This, to me, is fairly small compared to what's currently allowed, so I have no other questions.
Thank you, Mr. Michaeli. Mr. Matthews?
Sure, I just have to understand a little bit on the size of the structure. How many vehicles are you looking to store there?
8 or 9, maybe more.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Matthews. Mr. Michaeli, was there a concern about water?
Oh,
In Ms.
yeah. Do you want me-
Saba's-
she-
Yes.
there was.
Yeah, hang on, I'm just looking for it.
Oh, did you want to address?
No,
it?
no, I got it.
Okay, find it.
This entire paragraph.
This one, okay, thank you. Okay, she says that the structure appears to be placed over an altered drainage stream.
It's not.
It is not.
Nope. Unsure where that came from.
She says documentation secured from the town shows that the alteration of the stream and laying of the piping was never approved and laid incorrectly. She
I don't
has
think that's true.
documentation. Matt, are you familiar with this?
Very.
Can you explain for us, please?
So upon review of this project, I was aware that there is a pipe system that's installed on the north side of the property, and I understand that the building is placed in its location that is proposed to avoid that pipe. Approximately a year and a half ago, we had received several complaints of flooding due to perhaps an obstruction in this pipe, and we went to great lengths through our town engineering office as well as our town highway department to identify, in fact, that there was an obstruction. There was almost a 36-inch long log wedged in the corrugation of this 36-inch diameter pipe, which the owner had retrieved, removed it, and has been keeping an eye on that system to prevent any more blockage. Since then, I don't believe that there have been any other drainage issues. The pipe was installed a little bit after the time that the home was built through an approved fill permit process that went through our town board and sized accordingly. There were some comments made at the time about its installation, but the record is silent on anything that had happened post those comments. And to this date, up until about a year and a half ago, had been operating correctly until this blockage occurred.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay. We'll return to questions from the board. Mr. Storr?
Thank you, Madam Chair. No questions at this time.
Thank you. Mr. Tillmans?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So again, obviously the car use is really personal use, recreational
Yeah.
use, hobby?
Yep,
Okay, no commercial use?
correct.
Okay, no further questions.
Thank you. Mr. Zelak?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question. Is your runoff going to attach to this 36-inch culvert?
No.
Where's your runoff
There's
going?
the gutters are going along the side, and the drain spouts are going in the back.
Okay, so it just surface?
Yeah, yeah, the pipe's next to it, so I hadn't really thought about that, but I know they're draining down in the back, the two back corners. By back, I mean west.
I guess my question is, you're not going to attach
No,
downspouts
the
to
pipe
this
is on the north side, and the two downspouts are gonna be on the west side.
Okay.
And it's, 20 feet away at that point in time, maybe more.
Okay, thank you. No further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zelak. Mr. Henning?
Thank you, Madam Chair, no questions.
Thank you. Excuse me, please. I have no questions at this time. Sir, you can have a seat.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anyone in the audience have any comments or questions? Okay, there being none.
Oh, I do have.
I'm sorry, please come up. Just give us your name and address for the record.
My name's Mary Beth Saba. I'm actually here. I actually have Sarah on video because she couldn't be here today. So this is, actually, if you hold on, I will turn her around so that she can speak. Sarah, can you see the group?
Yeah, can everyone hear me?
We can.
Yep,
If you hold it right up to the microphone,
yep.
and it's Sarah, what is her last name?
Saba, S-A-B-A. And she owns the property across from 540 Ransom.
What's the address?
It's in undeveloped. I think it's 539, Sarah?
It'll be 537.
537.
I'm sorry, you're saying there's no house there
There's
yet?
no house at this point.
She owns this strip between 539
Gotcha. Thank
and
you.
533.
Ms. Saba, please go ahead.
Yeah, so my biggest concern, and there has been no flooding yet, and we're kind of waiting to see what happens, but the pipe was never thoroughly looked at. Yes, there was a large tree, I guess you could say, or large branch that was found in the pipe that we received notice about, but records say that the pipe, again, like for the 100th time, was laid incorrectly from the beginning. So when the engineer or whoever came to assess the beginning and end of the pipe, the problem is not at the beginning and end of the pipe. It's somewhere in the middle of the pipe. There's probably 3 or 4 pipes that are laid along that stream. So my concern is that if we're putting a structure so close to that, and we have yet to know if the flooding is going to be fixed, what happens? I mean, I doubt that anything will ever be done about it. People will just keep flooding on the east side of Ransom Road. But what happens when there is a problem with the pipe and the flooding isn't resolved? And now what? Are we going to allow him to put up a structure? Are we going to have to remove that structure to get to the pipe? Is that going to be an issue? And also, I'm a little confused I think it's pretty clear that this isn't for personal use. My neighbor has 10 plus different cars in his driveway every single day. So I'm a little confused of why we're allowing somebody to build a shop to work on cars and run a business out of their garage, yet other neighbors directly next to me are not allowed to own their own business out of their house, and in fact don't even have equipment or aren't even running a business out of their house. So I'm just kind of confused about that and how this is being allowed.
It would be a violation of code to operate a business out of this structure or anywhere on the property, in a residential property. And we have clarified with the owner that that is not his intent. He understands that he would not be permitted to run a business.
Okay, so because he says he's not going to run a business, it's okay? Like, it's very clear he's running a business out of his house. Who has 20 cars in their driveway year-round? Those are all his cars? Can we see documentation?
Well, we have his word, and if he's running a business, then that would be addressed.
So,
The point of his request that's before the board tonight is a variance of the size. There's nothing that's keeping him from building his pole barn in that area. It's just a question of, can he make it higher and can he make it larger than code allows? As Mr. Michaeli pointed out, we've had requests that were much larger. This is fairly mild compared to other requests that we've granted.
right, but those requests may not have been in the same, in the same environment, right? This is, like when you start imposing and you start building commercial properties or commercial dwellings inside a residential community, right? It changes the fabric of that community.
Absolutely.
It changes the look.
Absolutely.
People don't move out to Lancaster, the rural part of Lancaster, to look at, large structures and commercial-sized structures. So,
I have a question for Matt, please. Matt, can you do me a favor? Can you look up to see if a variance was ever granted for 574 Ransom Road? Thank you.
So clearly, commercial structures are not allowed.
Right.
correct, right. But the size of this borders on commercial size.
Again,
Right? If it was
There's a lot
smaller.
of people, I have to say something, there's a lot of pole barns out there in the town, this size and larger, that are not used for commercial. They're used because people have
Sure.
have gear, have farm equipment.
Absolutely. We like our toys,
So
too.
if this particular homeowner has been running a business out of there, the town, I'm not sure if the town, I'm going to ask Matt when he's done doing what he's doing now, if that's ever been an issue here. If the building is used for commercial use, it'll be clearly violating code and subject to fines. It's subject to fines at that time.
Right.
If he's been doing it now, I don't know if it's ever been reported, if it's ever been an issue. We're here just to vote on whether or not this variance should be allowed.
Right.
And should we deny these variance requests, and he falls within the code and the size, he can still go ahead and build this building?
Sure.
Just by the 286 less square feet.
Sure.
And the 2 feet less. So we're not not allowing him to build the structure.
Correct.
So the size is kind of irrelevant. It's a little bit larger than code, but it's not egregious. And I think, Matt, did you not say that the drainage was reviewed by the town earlier?
By the engineer.
Originally. So I'm not sure that those comments are completely accurate, that it
Right.
was
Well,
not.
it was unclear where the structure was being placed, right? So there, there has been flooding, there has been problems on that property. We don't know if it's been resolved. We haven't hit spring, so we won't know until we have some good rainfalls to determine if it's been resolved or not. So that's yet to come. So,
We're also still waiting for somebody to properly assess the pipe, like the entire pipe along the ground, not just one end and the other end 200 feet the other side.
What do you mean by assess?
What?
Define what you mean by assess the pipe. I don't understand that.
Like to take the measurements of the pipe, the documentation from the previous engineer how many years ago said that the pipe was placed at a curve and that it was placed at the wrong elevation. So the pipes, based on what the documentation says, are not aligning somewhere underground there, somewhere in the middle there. But we haven't taken the depth of the pipes. The engineer never did that. They just came in and, did a half-assed job and took the depth of one end and then took the depth of the other, and they said, oh yeah, it's draining downhill. But that's not what the documentation says. It says that it's placed at the wrong elevation, in the middle of the pipes, and at a curve. So how would we know that if we're just taking one side or the other? So we're
Are there
still waiting
as-bills,
to
Matt?
get that
I'm not sure what that's to do with
process,
this.
and it never
Yeah.
was.
Really has nothing to do with that anyways.
Is there as-built on this at all by chance?
There was a camera sent down the 200-foot length of the pipe. They were able to identify, as I said, a log that was almost 36 inches in diameter. And this log has been in that pipe at such a time to where it started growing inside the pipe. You can see that vertical branch, that's new growth of a chopped up tree that happened to flow down that pipe.
Is that steel or plastic?
It's a steel corrugated pipe. Yep. So that cameraing of that entire length was documented, as well as our surveyor, the town engineer, was able to survey the inverts at both ends, and they were able to determine that there is flow going through that pipe.
There's pitch.
Through the town engineer. Documentation is readily available with the engineering department. It was reported back to the highway department as well as the drainage committee at the time that the remedy was underway. We had notices out, and we had extensive conversations with the owner about maintaining that pipe. It is definitely is a 36-inch pipe that was installed in a streamway back in the maybe perhaps the late 90s.
Matt, I'm sorry, I didn't see. So where on the property does that pipe play?
Without exactly
Yeah.
identifying it, it's on the north end, and it basically hits the back corner of the property.
Okay.
It comes in at the culvert at the roadway, and it hits the back corner.
So it would still be, it's not,
It's not
This-
monitored
this-
on an annual basis, but at the time of the correction, it was identified to be unobstructed.
so it's somewhere in between where the proposed pole barn would
It
be?
was at
property
the
line.
209-foot distance from the road is where they found the obstruction.
And how far from the north property line?
That exact location is, we don't have that yet.
The obstruction?
No, the pipe.
The pipe itself?
Matt, can you just hold on? We'll see if Ms. Saba has any questions for you.
Was there,
Hang on one second. Ms. Saba, do you have questions for the code enforcement officer?
Well, I guess I understand that there was, they had a camera go down there and they were able to see the obstruction, but my question, I feel like, is still not being answered. Right, Matt just said, yes, they assessed the pipe from the front and they assessed the pipe from the back, and they said, yes, water is flowing through there. Sure, water is flowing through there, but is it flowing through there properly? Was the camera that you sent down there able to pick up the change in elevation or a curve or a divot in the pipe somewhere in the middle there? Like, is that why there's branches being stuck on it? Because the pipe was placed at a curve, like the documentation says, or because it was placed at the wrong elevation, like the documentation says? If the camera cannot show that, can we please assess the center of that? Because that is our only concern. And I'm speaking for myself and my neighbors along Ransom Road that have had the fire department having to come shut down their power because they have water flooding in their basement. So that is just a really big concern, and we want to make sure that this isn't going to be overlooked by allowing a structure to be so close to it.
Thank you.
Matt, the integrity of the pipe is in good standing?
Right.
If that's the case, then that can be filled with water and it's not leaking out. It should not be leaking out to anybody's property, but going to the culvert pipe at the south end or the east end.
Right,
And if it's got flow, which means it's got pitch.
right. It does, but also.
It doesn't matter if it goes left and right, as long as the water's moving,
Okay.
it's still moving
Right.
out.
But we were also told there was no problem with the flow. There was no problem with the
That, I
flooding.
think,
There was no
until they
problem
found-
with the backup until we pushed to have it.
Until they found the tree
Right.
growing in there.
Can I say that the,
Hang on. Anything else?
No, I don't, Sarah, do you have anything else?
No, I just, I just feel like I don't understand why my specific question can't be answered. Yes, there is flow, but there are multiple pipes laid along there. So, am I the one confused? You know what I mean? I don't understand how we're looking at one pipe over here and then 4 pipes down the line where we're looking at another pipe. We don't know if it's consistent flow. We don't know if the pipes are placed properly somewhere in the middle or on a curve or on a turn. I mean, you can literally look at the documentation. That's exactly what it says. So I'm not understanding why we can't properly assess that center of the pipe to make sure it's placed right. If it's not, we can fix it and he can build whatever he wants.
Well, unfortunately, what's in front of us tonight has nothing to do with that irrigation line
Right.
or assessment of that pipe.
Right.
We're strictly voting on these 2 variance requests, so we have no ability to answer those questions,
Right.
so.
Right, but I guess the request is to, if the structure is going over the piping, that we refrain from allowing it so that we can determine if there's still a flooding problem.
I think Mr. Fishone has answered those questions.
I would agree that we cannot build a structure over the top of this pipe.
Okay.
It can't happen.
Okay.
I think someone already asked me that night.
Yeah, one at a time, please.
Right. And it was unclear when we looked at the drawing, so that's the first thing about the piping.
Okay, you need to address the board, each of you. Okay, thank you very
Okay.
much for your
All
comments
right.
and your time.
Okay.
Did you want to come back, sir?
So Matt, was there ever a variance issued for 574 ransom? I'm sorry for keeping
I'm
persistent.
sorry, but I wasn't able to find that information in our database of our software. I'm sure that if there was, it could be filed in the council of office.
I was just going to say that someone already asked if I was putting the building on the pipe, and I answered that I'm not putting the building on the pipe.
Yes, thank you. Any other questions from the audience? Anything the board that's come up that the board wants to address? Okay, do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Storr.
Whereas the zoning board of appeals of the town of Lancaster has made the following findings, that this area variance for a single-family residence, according to part 617.5C17 of the New York State Code Rules Regulations, is a type 2 action, has been determined not to have a significant impact on the environment, therefore is not subject to a secret review, that no undesirable change will be produced in the character of the neighborhood by granting of the area variance relief sought, because there is a similar structure approximately 300 feet away from the proposed variance. That no detriment to nearby properties will be created by the granting of the area variance sought, because the town engineer said it will not affect drainage. That the benefits sought by the applicant cannot be achieved by some other method feasible for the applicant to pursue other than the area variance sought. That the requested area variance is not substantial. That the proposed area variance will not have an adverse effect or impact on the physical or environmental conditions of the neighborhood or district. That the alleged difficulty is self-created, but not to the extent necessary to preclude the granting of the area variance relief sought. That this board is taking into consideration the benefit of the applicant if the variance sought is granted as weighted against the detriment to the health, safety, and welfare of the neighborhood or district. That within the intent and purposes of this ordinance, the variance relief sought, if granted, is the minimum variance necessary to afford relief. That no commercial enterprise other than those permitted by Chapter 400 of the Code of the Town of Lancaster will be conducted on the premises.
Thank you. I'll second. Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Hain.
Yes.
Mr. Matthews.
Yes.
Mr. Michaely.
Yes.
Mr. Storr.
Yes.
Mr. Tillman.
Yes.
Mr. Zalek.
Yes.
Chairman Monticelli.
Yes. Mr. Prinsbach, your request has been granted. You just need to follow up with the building department.
Yes.
Okay? You're welcome. Okay. Will you read the next case, please, Diane?
The third case considered by the Zoning Board of Appeals is that of the petition of Thomas S. People, Inc., 1860 Buffalo Road, Rochester, New York, for one variance for the purpose of installing a roof cover on premises owned by People, Inc. at 4797 William Street, Lancaster, New York, to wit. A variance from the requirements of Chapter 400 zoning Section 14, subsection D, Schedule B of the Code of the Town of Lancaster. The request calls for installing a roof cover over an existing non-conforming ramp and exterior deck 4 feet from an existing detached garage structure. Chapter 400 zoning Section 14, subsection D, Schedule B of the Code of the Town of Lancaster requires an accessory to be a minimum of 10 feet from another structure. Petitioner therefore requests a 6-foot variance.
Thank you. Do we have a representative, Southeast Community Works?
Yes,
Yes.
People Inc.
Good evening.
Good evening. I'm Mike Mattel, actually with Paul Davis. We're the ones that contracted to do the work, assuming approval. We represent People Inc. tonight.
And your last name again, please?
Matella, M-A-T-E-L-A.
Okay, and your address?
Business address is 1075 Buffalo Road, Rochester, New York, 14624.
Thank you. Okay, tell us about your project, please.
Yeah, essentially what was already covered, you know, there's a sidewalk coming from the building. We're looking to, or the ownership is looking to put a covered, you know, to cover the walkway, the ramp leading up to the house, primarily for health and safety reasons for the residents, you know, just to protect them, you know, when it's, you know, the inclement weather and everything else, you know, help also keep the walkway clear, you know, snow and ice during the winter months.
Okay. All right, we'll turn it over to the board. Mr. Matthews?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have no questions.
Thank you. Mr. Storr?
Thank you, Madam Chair, no questions.
Mr. Tillmans?
Thank you, Madam Chair, no questions.
Mr. Zelak?
Thank you, Madam Chair, I have no questions as well.
Mr. Hain?
Just a quick description of, so there's an existing wooden ramp there, correct?
Correct.
And that's going to remain?
Yes.
And you're just adding a wooden type cover to that or over that?
Essentially, yes, sir.
Okay. I have no more questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hain. Mr. Michaeli?
Thank you, Madam Chair, I have no questions.
Thank you, Mr. Michaeli. I have no questions either. Anyone in the audience? There being none, do we have a motion?
I can make a motion.
I'm sorry, Mr. Tillmans? Thank you.
Whereas the zoning board of appeals of the town of Lancaster has made the following findings, that this area variance for single-family residence according to part 617.5C17 of the New York State Codes, Rules, and Regulations is a type 2 action and has been determined not to have a significant impact on the environment, therefore it is not subject to a seeker review. That no undesirable change will be produced in the character of the neighborhood by the granting of the area variance relief sought, because the ramp is already in place and it's just adding a cover over the ramp. That no detriment to the nearby properties will be created by the granting of the area variance relief sought. That the benefits sought by the applicants cannot be achieved by some other method feasible for the applicants to pursue, other than the area variance relief sought. That the requested area variance relief is not substantial. That the proposed area variance relief will not have an adverse effect or impact on the physical or environmental conditions in the neighborhood or district. That the alleged difficulty is self-created but not to the extent necessary to preclude the granting of the area variance relief sought. This board has taken into consideration the benefit to the applicants of the variance relief sought is granted as weighed against the detriment to the health, safety, and welfare of the neighborhood or community by such grant. That within the intent and purposes of this ordinance, the variance relief sought, if granted, is the minimum variance necessary to afford relief.
Thank you. Do we have second, Mr. Storr? Thank you. Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Hain?
Yes.
Mr. Matthews?
Yes.
Mr. Michaeli?
Yes.
Mr. Storr?
Yes.
Mr. Tillmans?
Yes.
Mr. Zelak?
Yes.
Chairman Menacee?
Yes. Sir, your request has been granted. Again, just follow up with the building department. Okay, thank you. Anyone have any other business to discuss? Okay, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second, Mr. Michaeli. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we're out.
Yeah, when she was holding it to her ear, because she would hold it to her ear to get closer to it.